everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And today we have a very special guest and also a very special topic we're going to go over today, and that is healthcare cost. Housing, human issues, and healthcare costs are big in the upcoming election, but let's just take a little brief of what's going on here. First of all, healthcare costs in the U.S. is about $14,000 per person. That's problem number one. Problem number two, healthcare cost is about 17% of our gross domestic product. So what does that mean in total? Well, how about this? Healthcare in the USA costs more than the entire economy of Japan or Germany. So you have to imagine all those Toyotas that were built and sold, all the cars and everything in Japan. Well, our healthcare was bigger than that. How about BMW and Porsche? Our healthcare is bigger than that. So it's pretty big. And now here's the real problem I have. K through education healthcare equals none, or at least I had none. So I'm going, wow, we don't get any education in an area that is about 17%, 20% of our GDP. So with that, we're going to bring you somebody who has some education, the former Comptroller General of the United States of America, who had to deal with these issues from Capitol Hill, none other than the Honorable David M. Walker, and we're going to listen to see what he has to say, plus our special guest, Dr. Michael Patmos, who is board certified in internal medicine. But first, David, wait, I got the wrong person. That's Michael. Let's go to David right now. Okay, David, we'll get to your introductory remarks about healthcare cost in the United States. It's a major problem, and I think it's going to be a big problem coming up in the midterm elections.
Well, let me provide a little bit of an intro that I want to hear from Michael, and we can kind of go back and forth. We probably have other people who are going to join us today. I know Sasha's on. First, you talked about how much healthcare is as a percentage of the economy. That's number one in the world. Nobody's even close. Secondly, you talked about how much it is per person. Same thing. Number one in the world. Nobody's even close. You talked about the fact that we don't have any meaningful education on this in K through 12. Well, you can say the same thing about financial literacy and civic responsibility. And yet what you didn't talk about, which is important, and I know you know this, is despite the fact that we spend so much money, including on the areas like education, which I talked about, as compared to other countries, we get below average results. In healthcare, we have below average life expectancy for industrialized nations. We have above average infant mortality. We have above average medical error rates. In K through 12 education, we have below average performance with regard to math and science and reading. So, you know, value for money is horrible. All right. My personal view, and I think we can end up having an interactive conversation here, is that we need to have a conversation about our healthcare system that we've never had before, because we clearly have unacceptable results, and yet we have a system that is financially unsustainable in its present form. The discussion that we need to have is how much universal health care, and yes, I said universal health care, is appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. And then after we decide that, we can then talk about, okay, are there other classes of individuals that ought to get more help than that basic and essential, such as the poor, such as veterans, such as the disabled? But what typically happens in the United States, and is clearly the case in healthcare, is we promise too much, we subsidize too many, and we write a lot of blank checks. And that will bankrupt the nation. And the U.S. is not exempt from the laws of prudent finance. Furthermore, nobody's going to bail us out. So that's an intro, and then we can go from there.
Okay, I'll bring in Dr. Michael Patmos, who has some comments also on this particular area, and we'll see what he has to say about the healthcare cost. Dr. Patmos.
Good morning, everyone. And David, thank you for that excellent introduction. I agree 100% with your comments. This is an area that's been very important to me over the last quarter century. I have been to graduate school in healthcare in management and studied healthcare economics. And this has been a topic of personal interest for me for a long time. I have the insight also of being a clinician and having worked in hospitals for nearly 50 years. And so here's a little interesting fact. You know, the estimate for the total federal budget for 2024 in expenditures is about 6.8 trillion. Of that, 1.2 trillion is the estimate for what will be spent on Medicare. That's a lot. That's a big chunk of our federal budget going for Medicare. Well, here's the really interesting part. A quarter of all of Medicare spending, 25%, $400 billion of Medicare spending is spent on patients in the last year of life. This is really a problem, and it's very challenging because we don't always know when someone is in their last year of life. And, it implies that there's a lot of medical care that may not be of very high value for patients in the last year of life. But what determines what's of high value and what is futile? That's very subjective. What I can tell you as a clinician is I have never walked into an ICU, any ICU anywhere, without seeing at least one or two patients who are terminally ill, clearly not going to make it, yet still receiving expensive, extraordinary, heroic care. Only in the United States can you walk into an ICU and see a 95-year-old with metastatic cancer or advanced Alzheimer's disease on a ventilator with hemodynamic monitoring receiving dialysis. This kind of extraordinary high complexity care is hideously expensive and is being delivered in many cases inappropriately to patients who are terminal and who should be instead in a palliative care program or a hospice program. Hospice care and palliative care in the United States has become more popular. Only about half Medicare patients, though, actually end up dying in a hospice program. The other half still die in hospitals. And so a lot of our money is being spent on heroic care for patients who are not going to make it.
Well, Doctor, let me mention a few things. You may or may not know some of my background with regard to healthcare. Obviously, you're a physician, so you have a lot more. You're on the front line, if you will. Okay.
I was.
I was a trustee of Social Security and Medicare. In addition to that, I've obviously done a lot of work from a policy analysis standpoint, in various positions, including as Comptroller General of the United States. But what you may not know is I was tapped to co-chair the Institute of Medicine's End of Life Committee, along with a physician who at the time was dean and chair of the medical school at Stanford University, who had also, been a practicing physician and ran several hospitals in the Boston area. But, that is a big issue. And as you talk about, the end of life care is a big issue. But, you talk about Medicare, but, that's just a subset of what we're spending on healthcare. Look at Medicaid, look at ACA subsidies, look at, what we're spending with regard to the civilian and military employees and retirees. The number is huge. One of the things that I think we need to focus on is we need to think about several things. One, we can't write a blank check for healthcare. Even Sweden, which provides medicine cradle to grave, doesn't write a blank check for healthcare because they know it'll bankrupt them. Okay. Secondly, we need more evidence-based standards. We need to be paying more for evidence-based procedures, if you will, rather than just activities. We also need a safe harbor for physicians who practice in accordance with those evidence-based standards, which could deal with the kind of situation that you're talking about with regard to end-of-life care, but frankly has application much broader than end-of-life care as well. And so those are just a few preliminary thoughts, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And then, some of our other participants, may have some comments and questions as well.
You're right. The issue of futile care at end of life for Medicare patients is a big problem, but it's not the entire problem. There is inappropriate, ineffective, and unnecessary care outside of the Medicare program as well. one of my jobs is I serve as a consultant to a health system in California, where I review prior authorization requests, and I have approval and denial authority over these requests. And I see a lot of requests for stuff that is just silly. For example, I saw one the other day. The doctor wasn't sure what was wrong with the patient, so the doctor ordered an MRI of the brain, an MRI of the neck, an MRI of the spine, just sort of like gunshot ordering things because they really don't know what's wrong and didn't take a good history or do a good physical. So there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of this is the only place in the world where a doctor will order an MRI for tennis elbow.
Oh, gee. Yeah, well, I have tendonitis of my shoulder, which has been very, very frustrating, but that's a different issue. Yeah.
So we do have a lot of, there's just a lot of ordering of unnecessary stuff. We see it all the time. Doctors who work on the payer side or supervising physicians. I've had roles where my job was to oversee hospitalist care. And, sometimes you can't tell, and you do end up ordering things that, I really didn't need that, but I just didn't know. But a lot of times it's just this like tendency to just check off boxes on the order sheet and order tons of stuff. And that gets really expensive, and that cost gets passed on because, reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid for hospitals is often below cost. So that deficit is cost shifted onto commercial patients who pay more. That's why you have the $80 aspirin.
Right. It's also where the uninsured can end up having to pay a lot more if at the same point in time, the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is healthcare costs.
Yes.
And there's a huge difference between what hospitals end up billing and what they get paid. I'll give you a personal experience. I had a terrible automobile accident last December, and I was lucky to walk away from it, as well as my wife. And I spent, a little over a day in the hospital. And when the bill came, it was $35,000. And so I wanted my healthcare insurance company to be able to determine what's reasonable and customary, and they chopped it down to a four-figure number rather than a five-figure number. And I'm still trying to get this resolved, and it's been almost a year. It's ridiculous.
Well, you're talking my language. That's the life. That's where I've been in. That's the life I've been involved with for many years. No, you're right. That's how. So your hospital probably has operating losses on Medi-Cal or Medicaid and Medicare, and so they cost shift that onto the commercially insured patients. So it's a huge problem, and there's no one single bullet that will fix it. But I'm very passionate about the importance of having transparent and honest discussions with patients when they have a terminal diagnosis. Physicians don't like having that conversation. It's a very uncomfortable thing to sit with a patient and give them bad news like that. So they tend to not do it. And, the family will always encourage the patients to fight. Dad, you've got to fight it. And the patients are afraid, and no one ever talks to them about the fact that their condition really is terminal. And how do they want to spend their last days? Patients will tell you, if they're asked, that they don't want to spend their last days in an ICU attached to machinery. They would rather be at home with their loved ones. But they often don't get a chance to express that. And unless they have it written ahead of time in their healthcare directives, they're going to end up getting heroic care. And that's a lot of waste. We could reduce our federal budget considerably if we promoted palliative care and hospice care.
Right. And I think advanced directives, there's no question that that's something that everybody ought to have. Okay.
Yes.
Combined with more education, combined with evidence-based standards. I mean, one of the things that I find, Doctor, is that, it takes three things for any system to be successful and sustainable, in my view. Number one, you have to have proper incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing. Number two, you have to have adequate transparency to provide reasonable assurance that they will do the right thing because a variety of parties are looking. And thirdly, you have to have appropriate accountability if they don't do the right thing, but also recognize and reward those who do the right thing. And guess what? For healthcare, for K through 12 education, for our immigration system, for our tax system, and I could go on, we're 0 for 3. As they say in baseball, that's a strikeout. So no wonder we got a problem.
Yeah.
You're right. It's funny, I am currently, for the past couple of years, I am an enrollee in a Kaiser Permanente Medicare Advantage plan, and it's got very low premium. It's a tightly managed HMO. I have to go through a primary care doctor, and I can only see Kaiser physicians at Kaiser facilities. A lot of people would have problems with that. I have no problem with it at all. The care I've received is excellent. In fact, I'm having a procedure on Wednesday that would normally cost about $50,000. It's going to cost me $2,000 because I'm getting it through the Kaiser system. I wasn't always a Kaiser patient. I've also been in commercial plans, Blue Cross plans, and so forth. And I can tell you that Kaiser has such good control of utilization that their value proposition is much greater. It's why they lead in Western markets, like in California and the West Coast. Kaiser is the dominant health plan because their value is so high. Their value equation is so high. Employers love it, and patients and doctors love Kaiser. But it's an HMO, and boy, it is tight utilization. You can't just go to any doctor and just get an MRI for tennis elbow.
And of course, Kaiser's not everywhere. They're very
That's true.
prevalent in the West, but they're not everywhere. Yeah.
Well, they tried it. They tried it in the Northeast, and they found that people did not buy into that sense of needing to be cost effective. I want it all kind of mentality.
Well, and they also want their own physicians. There are challenges with regard to HMOs, and
yes.
And not all providers will take HMOs too. I mean, that's another issue that you have. Yeah.
Yeah, we brought in a couple more panelists, Dr. Sharif Rana from Bangladesh and Jatovi McDuffie from Durham. He can probably give us a little perspective on what's going on in the other side of the world, in Asia. Dr. Sharif, how do they treat healthcare over where you're at?
This is very interesting discussions, and I really like this healthcare program. Last year I was in Stanford University, and that time I do work with one of the interesting startup. It's called Amedis. So Amedis is something they're operating in Europe, in Asia, in Singapore, specifically in UAE, and I'm promoting it in Bangladesh. What I learned from USA, this is very interesting that US economy, that I find many of the US people, they have a lot of healthcare challenge. But as your government, they do highly promote capitalism and all of the things. So they have different perspective. But if we focus on this Asian market, example in UAE or in China and all of the countries, they have interesting policy and support by the government. I think we have to go for fusion. Example, if you focus on Bangladesh healthcare market, if you focus on this US, specifically California, where I have experience market, I think together we can contribute. Together we can combine. Specifically, this medicine partnerships we can do together. By this way, the US doctor can provide special consultation, which is very, very important for emerging economy like Bangladesh. We can do for research collaboration between the university, let's say Stanford University's healthcare research or Bangladesh medical healthcare research. It can bring a lot of success. I'm a big fan of artificial intelligence. So definitely AI and data science hub we can create together. By this way, we can go for disease predictions, health analytics, and early diagnostics. Even though US can utilize our caregiver. I saw there is a shortage of caregiver in USA. And definitely I see that they have a very big manufacturing hub, like medical device manufacturing hub. And most important thing is policy for me. Like I can understand that USA is open market, USA has different issues, but I have a specific question for Mr. Michael and for Mr. Dave. What do you think about new policy of healthcare? What the new innovation you can bring for US healthcare policy? How you can introduce artificial intelligence? How you can introduce better healthcare policy for US citizen? How you can bring more affordable treatment for US citizens, and how we can collaborate. Yeah.
Well, that's a great question. I think artificial intelligence is important. I heard a great quote, CME course I took a couple of years ago at Harvard that said that AI won't put doctors out of business. AI will only put doctors out of business who don't use AI. I use artificial intelligence all the time to help narrow down my thinking, and I use it in conjunction with UpToDate, which is an online clinical decision support tool. I think that artificial intelligence can be useful to physicians because a lot of times you're confronted, especially if you're a primary care doctor and you have such a broad area that you have to manage patients and you never know what's going to walk in. And sometimes it's confusing. You really don't know what the patient has and you're trying to narrow it down. And I think artificial intelligence can help with that and allow you to do a little bit of a more tailored and specific evaluation instead of the shotgun approach of ordering every test in the book.
Yeah, I would say several things. First, I think there clearly is an opportunity to partner for progress with regard to research and development activities in general, but also with regard to things like prescription drugs, okay, if you will. I also think that I'm also a supporter of AI and believe that AI can be very helpful with regard to research, with regard to testing. I also agree with the doctor that I think AI can be helpful with regard to physicians in trying to decide what to do and what not to do. And I think, quite frankly, if we move to an evidence-based approach, there's a big role for AI combined with, having some type of physician-based system that sets practice standards. It's not going to be done by the government. It needs to, it might be approved by the government, but it needs to be done by physicians, and it can be enabled by AI, which is constantly updating, right? I mean, constantly updating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I got a question for the doctor mostly. So in the previous hour, we were talking about how some teenagers used CRISPR to come up with a potential treatment for Lyme disease. So my question is, obviously CRISPR is going to lead to a lot of good stuff. Will it also lead to bad stuff where lunatics in their garages spend 10 grand on a home CRISPR kit and start making viruses that have and letting them go to for all sorts of crazy reasons?
That's human nature. There's always going to be people who are going to try to misuse whatever it is. I mean, look at social media today. Social media has the power to do wonderful things. It can unite the world and we can all be in contact with one another. It can also be a vehicle for disinformation, foreign entities, foreign enemies using social media to misinform and disinform the American public and sway, the result of an election. So all of these things can be abused and used. And that's the $64,000 question, is how to manage that so that we don't we get the benefit of it without the adverse misuse of these technologies.
Well, let me throw out a question that I'd like to get people's reaction to. Okay, when I did my nationwide fiscal responsibility tour in 2012, and by the way, I may be doing another one in 2026. One of the things that we talked about among many areas was healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, and other aspects, including, ACA, et cetera. One of the issues that I threw out there to get a reaction from people was what level of basic and essential healthcare should be universal. In other words, what should everybody have that is got the biggest risk pool, which is the entire population, okay, which is publicly financed, delivered, based on evidence-based standards with a budget, as we talked about. And I will tell you what people supported, but I'd be interested in your reaction to it, okay? What people supported is everybody wants as much health care as they can get it as long as somebody else is paying for it. That's called human nature, okay? And as the doctor said, do whatever it takes. Keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting. But when you got right down to it, there was over 80% agreement that everybody needs the following: preventative and wellness, and catastrophic protection. In other words, protection against financial ruin due to an unexpected catastrophic accident or illness, because the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is healthcare cost. Okay. Now, there was an acknowledgement that, that for the disabled and for veterans and, for, certain other groups that you need, and for the poor, you might need to do more. But for a vast majority of the population, that's what we need to have universally available. And I'd like a reaction for some people on that, including the doctor. Maybe start with the doctor first.
Well, someone else, I don't want to dominate, so someone else.
No, just really quickly, and I think that I brought this up to Nick and everything. I had a coworker last year that had, or maybe it was early this year, but it had a major health situation and everything along those lines. Basically, he had what amounted to a stroke and all along those lines. And I think that when he got his bill, I'm surprised he didn't have a second stroke, because I think that the bill came up to something like $400,000 or something like that. Now, of course, this was he didn't have to pay that much. Eventually, the cost came much further down and everything like that. But the initial bill that came from the doctors, because he was in a coma and a number of other things, was probably close to, as I recall him telling me, $400,000. And like I said, I was surprised when he told me that figure, because I was just his friend. I almost fainted just at that number and everything like that. So that comes to your point about catastrophic situations and people wanting to be in that situation. I think it was closer to maybe a eighth of that is what he wound up having to pay and everything like along those lines, but it's still paying, even though that's not necessarily the kind of money that he makes, because he's in the nonprofit art world and all along those lines. But I would think, and then I'll let others speak as well, that I would think most people would want very basic health care and everything like that, and they would want that to be available to all. I know that that's what a lot of people think about, even when they think about Canada and other places. So I'm thinking in my mind that if you could be able to have, and it might be what you're talking about, Dave, the standard physical and the standard dental care and the other kind of like standard cares like that, that's what people want to be able to have at either cheap or free and all along those lines, just to be able to afford those, because those can be very expensive.
As we know, there's nothing free. It's a matter of how much and who pays. But Rick, go ahead. And then,
I think we need enough basic medical care that people don't start building guillotines like the French Revolution. If we hear that the tech bros are living to 120 and everybody else is passing away in their 70s, people are going to be pissed off. And I think it's a moving target. In the next couple of years, we're going to start seeing resistant pig kidneys grown in pigs under CRISPR that don't get rejected as much, that you might be able to get a pig kidney that'll give you 2 years of service before your body decides to get rid of it, which might give you time to get a human kidney. But that's not going to be cheap. That would be, health insurance companies aren't going to pay for pig kidneys at first. So rich people are going to be able to get better health care. Like Rupert Murdoch is like 95 now. He's still out there in the singles market. He looks like hell, but he's still banging 70-year-old ladies. So.
You sure it's not 17? Oh, I'm sorry. That's illegal.
That's illegal and everything. Hey, Dr.
I actually have to sign off because I have to go to work reviewing medical care in California. But I will say one. I will say.
Question is, I know you're getting off and everything, but
let him comment. Go ahead.
One last comment. When a lot of people think that if we just kick people off of Medicaid, we're going to save money, and I want people to think about that. Imagine, everybody needs basic health care. Imagine a diabetic patient. You're managing that patient every week. You see them in the office, adjusting their insulin and so forth to keep them out of the hospital. You take away their medical care, and in a matter of weeks, their blood sugar is going to be 600. They're going to be in the ICU with ketoacidosis, which is a lot more expensive. If you think that taking care of patients with Medicaid is expensive, wait till you see what happens if you don't take care of them. Right. With that, I will sign off. Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation, and hope you all have a great day.
Thank you, Doctor. Happy holidays to everybody. Go right. Jatovi, you've been patient, please.
I was going to, agree with, especially based off what the doctor just said, talking about keeping people on that preventative medicine. I think in terms of what you're talking about shouldn't be covered becomes the electives. But then that becomes a moving target because if something, for example, if something becomes cosmetic, you can have a ganglion cyst sitting on your wrist. And while it may not look the sexiest, it isn't, it's a benign tumor that just sits there. Is that elective that you get it removed, or is that one of those things that you need now that you must have removed? And that becomes one of those moving targets. But yes, definitely your basic coverage, your preventative cares, your catastrophic has to be there because, you know, okay, if somebody does have a stroke, if somebody does end up with cancer, if somebody does end up with something that is needs to be managed on a regular basis, that should be covered. But yeah, a baseline coverage needs to be there, and it should go across the nation because there are a couple of things I think you guys touched on earlier in your conversation in terms of what causes people, you know, that bankruptcy. If you get injured if you live like Mark and I live in North Carolina, if we go out to Oklahoma to go watch the Sooners play and we get injured at the football game, we're bankrupted because our insurance does not cover us in Oklahoma, and there is nobody in that network, regardless if it's an HMO that we're not dealing with that is only in North Carolina. There's not that same HMO that's out there in Oklahoma. So some type of coverage that would be nationwide, as well as covering one of the big things that we don't cover as much as we should, which is why childcare or children are so expensive to have, is the whole procedure of pregnancy. That is one thing that should be covered a lot more, but it's not. And, you know, when you end up with $60,000 bills just for having a child, or, you know, $70,000 bill because you went to the wrong hospital. So yeah, it should be some type of universal, some baseline. Every McDonald's has a $4 burger. Why can't every hospital have the same procedure for the same amount of cost?
Part of the issue, Jatovi and others, is how do you define basic and essential? Okay. Yeah. In theory, that's what ACA was supposed to do, but it didn't do a good job of it. Okay. And as a result, you know, healthcare costs are out of control. We're having to subsidize people making multiple times what the poverty level is. You know, another issue you have is how do you define the poverty level, right? I mean, you know, it's not just with regard to your normal income. I mean, you may end up getting a lot of, you know, direct and indirect subsidies from the federal government, right? And, you know, and or state government. And that's something that needs to be considered as well. Let's talk a little bit about prescription drugs. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about prescription drugs because they've been in the news lately. What do people think about, you know, burden sharing with regard to research and development for prescription drugs? That's the first question. And then I've got one after that.
Burden sharing as in...
Let me clarify what I mean, Jatovi. The simple fact is the United States pays a disproportionate share of the cost of research and development for prescription drugs, you know, as it relates to what we have to pay for prescription drugs. And one of the things that the president has talked about lately, and there are pros and cons to it, is, you know, for the same exact medication, you know, it might cost 2, 3, 4 times as much in the United States as it does other places, right? And why is that? Okay, part of that is because they have price controls and we don't have price controls, and there are pros and cons to that. Part of it is because we're paying a disproportionate share of the R&D. You know, and so therefore we have to pay more in order to make up for the fact that they're not paying a full load.
Well, I mean, that's a great question, David, because it deals with a legal issue of monopoly. I mean, if you think about the prescription drugs, they have a legal monopoly. That's the only reason they can exist in this fashion. And capitalism is supposed to be, you know, the buyer and seller, free exchange, you know, all this other stuff. Well, Yeah, but it gets thrown out the door when it comes to prescription drugs because in a prescription drug situation, what happens is that the state basically grants a monopoly to the inventor of the drug. So then they can charge, which is what they do, monopolistic prices as opposed to a fair market value price. Now, on the other hand, if you did allow any competitor to come in and do what they wanted to do, then you lose the incentive. Why would you spend money on R&D when you can't recoup the money? So it becomes a real difficult situation. But I do agree with you because living in Spain, healthcare is less expensive. Part of it is also they don't pay the doctors very much here. Medical doctors here make about $118,000 a year if they're good, usually 87 to 118, at least that's what the internet says. Okay, in the US, it's 300 to 400,000. It's a big difference. So the healthcare cost, somewhere along the line, the United States has to get that under control. And right now, as they say in Pawn Stars, that ain't happening. Yeah, Jadovi.
Well, I was just going to point out, I mean, when you're talking about the competitors, I think that's where we run into trouble, is because everything that we do in this country is about making money. It's about capitalism. It's hands down. Hey, every person has a dollar sign attached to their head. And when you talked about the competition coming into play into certain markets dealing with prescription drugs, for example, you can go to CVS and pick up some prescription Zyrtec for $30, or you can get the CVS brand, which is a generic brand, for $12. So when we run into those we get stuck with that monopolized market, as you spoke about, that only charges those crazy prices. We've had this prescription drug problem since the dawn of time. It's been there forever. I know Biden I remember Bush had pushed some changes in it, but it didn't really go through because we had some blocks there. Obama brought some of the prescription drugs down with ACA a little bit. I know Trump had done some in his first term. Biden did 64 drugs that got dropped in his term. Trump removed all those and then now is fighting back for 15. But it's just a money game, and it's dealing with the capital where the prescription drug group is one of the biggest lobbies in Congress. So they get what they want. They make whatever laws they want. Us getting out of that and dealing with some type of generic, it's the same thing in the healthcare thing, the public option. Other countries were able to figure all these things out. When you had talked about a basic healthcare, basic baseline of what healthcare is, other countries have figured that out. For some odd reason, we can't, because we're basing everything similar to the prescription drug setup. It's got to be about the bottom dollar, and that's what we're fighting with.
Yeah. Well,
there's a related issue, which is like orphan diseases. If you come down with something that only 300 Americans come down with every year, it might be highly possible to develop a drug for it, but that won't be developed because there's not enough money.
Correct. No, that's correct. Yeah, that's right. All right, let me talk about something else with prescription drugs. One of the things that the public also supported was no advertising of prescription drugs on television. Mm-hmm. No television advertising of prescription drugs, because that drives demand. It also puts a lot of pressure on physicians to prescribe things that they may or may not want to prescribe. Now, all this links back to evidence-based standards too. Now, one of the challenges with that, but I'd like a reaction, is advertising for prescription drugs is either number one or number two in revenue, and we've been talking about show me the money, okay, for television. Used to be cars, now I think it's prescription drugs, okay, but it's either number one or number two. So what are some thoughts on that?
Well, if you watch the news, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, like half the ads are for prescription drugs because the average news viewer is in their 60s. So yeah, you're right. It's a huge
Well,
and
There's only, my understanding is, and Jacoby, I'll come right to you, buddy, but my understanding is there's only 2 countries in the world that allow television advertising for prescription drugs, and we're one of them.
yeah, and you're taking the decisions out of the doctor's hands,
Right.
because when somebody sees an ad, they want that drug, and the doctor might know better, but yeah, the patient is insisting because they saw, people going, I don't know, boogie boarding after they take the drug. They want a boogie board.
And I think that's where I stand. I'm not really for the ads for prescription drugs, especially in a country where now conspiracies and anti-vax and all this other stuff. I'm smarter than my doctor. We have so many Google MDs that are out there right now.
Mhm.
It's because they see it on TV. They're influenced by what they see on TV, and they know more than their doctor. I need Ozempic. No, you don't. You need to stop eating fast food every night. So I think it would be great to take the prescription drugs and stuff like that off of TV, even though that would lose. Yeah, sure. The ad.
But there's a related industry, which is buttering up doctors, where you take doctors on junkets, you take them on vacation. The more they prescribe, this happened with the opioids, that the doctors were getting bribed to freaking get everybody hooked on the.
Let me talk about a tax issue that relates to healthcare. Okay, we lose about 1.7 to 1.8 trillion dollars a year because of deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions in the Internal Revenue Code. One of the top 3 tax preferences under the Internal Revenue Code is the fact that individuals do not pay income tax or payroll tax on employer provided and paid health care, including retiree health care, no matter how lucrative the health care might be. One of the things that the public supported was to phase out that tax preference, with the possible exception of allowing a tax preference for the basic and essential, okay, until you got to where you had universal basic and essential. But the idea is, last time I checked, employee benefits were considered compensation. And yet, this is several $100 billion a year in lost revenue because it's exempt from taxation under the current Internal Revenue Code.
Well, I have some good news for you.
I would like to address that from an employer's standpoint, because we may do this a little different, David, because you're probably doing a national tour of a group of employees, but employers look at this totally different. Here's the problem. The number one budget item that employers spend will be on labor. No matter what business you're in, it accounts about 50% of your gross revenues go about. Number 2 budget item today in the United States is employee health care. And I can tell you, after hiring enrolled actuaries and CPAs that work at our company, that it's almost like you can't hire them unless you have a good health plan. In other words, and the burden is on us as employers, because this is the way it's traditionally done, to provide that health plan. So it eats up a chunk of the revenues that come in. So the minute you phase out the deduction, I mean, if you want to, certainly it would
Not deduction. No. The employers should get a deduction for whatever, and they already do now. I'm talking about the income exclusion. In other words,
you mean include the income on the employee side?
Employee or retiree would be paying tax on the value.
The employees in the United States, I hate to say it, are heavily burdened with taxes as it is right now. In other words, it's like the greatest shift of wealth is from business owners and highly compensated employees and stockholders to employees. In other words, we're given all the breaks. And the thing is, the person who really doesn't get a break is the guy who's doing all the work. Now, if you did that, I would feel sorry for the employees, but you're breaking the back of the American worker, which has been going on for years. Why don't we tax the people that I work with, the people that are ultra high net worth individuals. Why are they always given
Yeah,
a
there's
free
no
pass?
question.
I just don't get it. You know, the thing is, high income taxpayers free breaks. And if you saw what's happened in the last 10 years, if you're a high net worth person, you're in the top 1%, you accumulated more money during the growth. You took almost 70, 80% of the growth in the last 10 years, and only like 2% went to the workers. So why don't we address the people that are the winners, the guys that are like these football contracts have been following? You know, Alex Golish leaves South Florida because he's only making $1.5 million because he can make $7 million over at Auburn and sign a $35 million contract. And everybody goes, hey, that's fine. It's not fine. This is going on all over the country. If you win the lottery, you're super rich and everybody's clapping for you. And all the workers, forget it.
Well, Nick, here's what I would say.
I would like the burden placed on these people, maybe going back to what Eisenhower did, and put a 90% tax on this stuff. Because
Here's what I would say. Today's session is about healthcare, and I'm happy to have a separate section that talks about taxes.
Okay.
There's no question that we need comprehensive tax reform because it fails the 3 tests of sustainability as well. Bottom line is, I think we need more people paying something and the wealthy to pay more. That's the bottom line. Okay. But that's a separate topic. Okay. Somebody had their hand up.
I had my hand up and everything. I was just curious because I was looking it up and everything, and I'd love to hear, because I was actually surprised it was not as bad as I thought it would be and everything. But I have a family friend. It's actually a person who's been involved with my brother for a number of years and everything, that had replacement heart surgery. So they got a brand new heart, and I was wondering what their monthly cost would be. So I know you have to have various things in order to maintain that heart, including blood thinners, beta blockers, and statins, and ACE inhibitors, and lisinopril, and all along those lines. But the cost for those wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I mean, I'm sure that my friend would probably think that they are expensive in their mind and her mind and everything. But like for blood thinners, it ranges from $15 to $200. Beta blockers is $10 to $200, and statins is $10 to $200, and ACE inhibitors is $10 to $100, and the lisinopril can be as low as $9. Now, a lot of that has to do with what the employees are given and the manufacturers, because some of them are given cost breaks and everything like that. So I was actually pleasantly surprised. And like I said, I have to check with the family friend to see.
And that's per month, right?
Per month. Yes.
Per month. Yeah.
Per month.
Jacoby, you had your hand up.
To get back to the question that you would ask about the employer and the healthcare and stuff, and I think when Nick, you brought it up about that being one of the biggest burdens for employers is that healthcare cost, and it's the same thing for the employees. But I think that gets back to what I was asking before about the basic healthcare. Why can't we shift that burden away from both the employer and the employee, going to that single payer setup, to where that tax burden, where we're talking about the progressive tax rate, where the wealthier tax a tad bit more to be able to afford something such as a basic healthcare system, where it does allow for people in, like if Rick comes to visit North Carolina and he stubs his toe or breaks his toe, he can still go to the doctor and still be seen without having to pay a $30,000-$40,000 bill when he gets back to California, because he's out of network in North Carolina. So I guess essentially when you're talking about the healthcare for the employers dealing with their employees, why not shift it to a single payer system that handles both, in a sense?
All right. Well, first, I think part of the problem between North Carolina and Oklahoma is because North Carolina considers Oklahoma to be a foreign country. That's a different issue. But more seriously, here's what the concept is, and it has an impact on a variety of parties, including employers, including employees, including the government. All right. The idea is we would define what a basic and essential level of coverage is, which would be preventative, wellness, and catastrophic. Catastrophic would vary based upon your income. All right. So it's not the standard for everybody. So the wealthy, obviously, the catastrophic would be a lot higher, number. You'd have to pay out of pocket a lot more, if you will. And so that would be single payer, universal, coverage, delivered under new standards, evidence-based standards, if you will. So that would relieve that burden from the employer, and that would relieve that burden from the individual, although obviously you got to finance it through taxes, okay? But if anybody wants more than that, and Nick, this is where you come in, all right, in order to be able to attract and retain top quality talent, then the employer would only focus on things above the basic and essential, all right?
Yeah.
But anything that was above the basic and essential would be, the employer would get a deduction, but the individual would have to pay taxes on the value of that.
Let's plug in some numbers, some possible numbers. To catastrophic, everybody at the lowest level, everybody above, if you have more than $10,000 a year in qualified medical expenses, the government picks it up via tax revenue, whatever. If you're making more than $100,000 a year, maybe it jumps up to 15 grand. 200, it jumps up to 20 grand, and that takes the catastrophic, like you said, off the table, out of the hands of employers. It's for frickin' everybody, and yeah, you do have to finance it.
Yeah, that's right.
Rick, the problem with that model, Rick, just is that this thing that we brought up earlier today is that the average USA healthcare cost per capita is now $14,000 per person. So if you had $10,000 as your cap, the average person is above that cap already. We have not figured a way to control our healthcare costs.
There's a reason. There are two reasons for that. One is the insurance roulette, and the other reason is the good medicine costs a ton. Medicine used to be cheap back when it wasn't effective, and everybody died of heart disease in the 1950s at age 58.
Well, also, I think the other reason for that, and that actual $14,000 per person will drop if we were to have a system where the preventative is there. People don't go to the doctor because it's expensive right now. So because if you can go and get a checkup without having to pay $50 to $100 just to get a checkup, just for the doctor to tell you something, or possibly find out that, oh no, you may have a heart condition that you need. If you can go on a regular basis to get that managed and not having to pay when it's as the doctor pointed out earlier, if you're off Medicaid, you're now having to pay $32,000 for something that was just going to cost you maybe $20 a month just to go and see on Medicaid.
Yeah.
So you're going to see the doctor now because of catastrophic times, because you can't afford to see it when it's preventative. So if you actually set it to a system to what Dave is talking about, we're having that preventative care, that initial care there that is readily available, people will go and take advantage of that because, hey, if I'm hurt, I need to go see a doctor. I don't want to go see a doctor if I've got to pay all this money. So I think instead of looking at, because I think the system, a similar system that what you're talking about is what they have in, like, is it New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland as well, where you can buy that supplemental insurance on top of that, where basically you have a baseline that everybody gets across the nation. And then if you want more, you buy into a supplemental insurance plan, and that insurance plan covers that extra catastrophic that you may not also see. So if you get hit by a car, or if you get hit with something of a stroke, you may get that catastrophic coverage, but there's still money on top of that, but you can buy insurance and that still lowers that cost again.
Well, the idea with Jatovi would be that you would have the basic and essential, which again would be preventative, wellness, and catastrophic, okay? That employers, unions, trade associations, a variety of groups could end up having plans that would be offered for people that want more than that. Okay, that employers would get a deduction, full deduction for whatever they pay. Okay, for that incremental amount. But that at some level, individuals, if they had a very lucrative plan, would have to pay some taxes on the value of that employee benefit, because that's what it is, or that retiree benefit. You got to keep in mind, this is coupled with evidence-based standards, with limitation on advertising, with a bunch of other factors that deal with what end-of-life care, which deals with what Nick is talking about. What are we going to do about this $14,000 number, right? I mean, what's driving the $14,000 number?
Well, Jacoby actually came up with at least our actuaries agree with them, that if you scaled it, like, and they do the plan you're saying, David, our actuaries say you'll save 25% on healthcare costs, which will drop the 14,000 down to around 11,500.
Okay, there we go.
You're getting closer to Rick's baseline of 10%, but you need to have that universal policy that's scaled so you can drop off about 25%.
I totally agree. But here, that is a conversation we've never had, which is much needed and long overdue.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think this conversation has happened before, but we were never open to it until now.
Well, it should have bipartisan support, because if not, the United States, like I said, we spend more on healthcare than the entire economy of Germany or the entire economy of Japan. It's just ridiculous. And like what you said, David, to start out the program, we're not any better off. As a matter of fact, in Spain, where they spend half that, the life expectancy is 5 years longer. So you're spending a lot of money for what is the real question. But like what Jacoby said, you're right. You guys, if you just adopt one policy, catastrophic and basic, that will cut the healthcare cost 25%. Now all of a sudden you're getting close to 10,000 being catastrophic. Right now everybody's in catastrophic, which is not good. So it's very difficult. But David, also, I don't see anybody in Congress who's moving this direction to solve the problem, or they don't even bother to solve it. They're not even addressing it.
But in fairness, Nick, Congress is a lag indicator. Don't look to Congress for leadership. Look to Congress for laggardship.
Well, that part I will not debate you. I will have to agree with you wholeheartedly. And with that, we'd like to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, special guest Michael Patmos, and our introductory course on healthcare in the United States. We'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Take care. Bye-bye.